going to talk about the self-developing organization, but, and I could go on literally for an hour, but I don't have that much time. And I could go through the elements of a self-developing organization and why technology and content are coming together to create this. But I'm actually going to spend a little bit more time on the trends behind it, why I believe this is an essential time for L&D to pursue this concept. And this is not a product. This is not something you go out and buy and implement. This is really a journey. It's a concept. It's a framing ideal that as L&D professionals, as you're architecting your strategies, as you're architecting your organizations and where you want to go over the next 1 to 3, 5 years, it can be I've given up, just like each of you have, invested a significant part of my waking life to helping organizations and helping people within organizations get better at what they do, right? That's why you're here today, I think, right? To learn and to better understand how you can move the ball forward in your own organizations. I happen to be very privileged to have worked for the past 15 years with SkillSoft, which, people familiar with SkillSoft here? Show of hands? Wow. People familiar with Sumtotal? A few less, but just a good number, thank you. I've been fortunate at SkillSoft that when I joined the company, which was through the acquisition of a company I started called Books 24/7. That name ring any bells, Books 24/7? A few people, yeah. SkillSoft bought my company in 2001. I joined SkillSoft. I ran Books 24/7 within SkillSoft. But for the last 7 years, I've been the Chief Strategy Officer for SkillSoft. I've also had the pleasure of leading the acquisition of Sumtotal. And that was a fundamental shift. In fact, Josh Burson wrote about it the day we announced the acquisition as saying this is a game changer for the industry because it's the very first time content and technology were coming together. And to me, that's one of the key themes of the self-developing organization principle is that there's an opportunity for the industry as a whole to break out of what's been done in the past and revision the space that we occupy and the value we deliver to our users. The other thing I will say from my background is that I have traveled extensively. I have worked with customers all around the world, and it's really been a privilege and an honor to work with literally thousands of companies who have been building very innovative development programs with all sorts of techniques and all sorts of technologies and all sorts of applications of content. And I hope to share some of that with you here today. Brandon Hall came out with a survey earlier this year. Every year they go out and they talk to CEOs, they talk to HR leaders, and they put together an extensive survey that rates how important various aspects of strategy are. They look at business strategy, marketing strategy, sales strategy, operational strategy. And year after year, you see the bars on the chart change. This is the very first year that people strategy has been ranked #1 in this survey. It's mind-blowing because it's not just by a little bit, it's by a lot. There's 30% of the respondents in the survey ranked people strategy as #1 over business strategy, which was ranked by 20% of the people. To me, that represents a fundamental shift. And we heard it this morning with Ajay talking at Jubilant Foods about how they're putting people out in the forefront. They're thinking about how they engage with their employees as a key driver of business performance. I think this is a key takeaway. Because as learning and development professionals, we are subjected to a lot of change right now, right? Now, there might be, I might be wrong about this, right? There might be some people in this audience who have it pretty well figured out, right? Everything's going great back at the office. The learning strategy, the development strategy, the compliance programs, engagement's high, turnover's non-existent. So everybody who's in that boat and just really came here for a day off, raise your hand. Okay, nobody. I didn't think so. These 12 or 13 themes are the themes I'm hearing over and over and over and over again, whether I'm visiting Fortune 500 companies in the US, companies in Brazil that are developing and moving in the middle market space, companies in Eastern Europe, wherever you are, I'm hearing engagements, the power of analytics, and I apologize if you can't get a good shot of that with your phones. I'm happy to make my slides available. Resolving skill gaps. Each one of these is really a critical initiative, a call to action for all of us in this room. The challenge I think we have as an industry, though, is that it's hard to take any one of these and advance the ball. Each one of these is difficult. And yet, there's so much momentum coming from the C-suite, that last slide about people strategy being number one. Your CEO is not going to wait for you to get around to all 12 or 13 of these, right? And I'll bet if you look at that list, you can start to pick out particular areas that are critical to your organization and can relate to. So I think the challenge for us is how do we do this? Because incrementalism, I think, is gone. We can't just make tiny steps. I think it's time for L&D to be bold. And the good news is that first slide suggests one thing that we should all be happy about in this room. And that is HR, L&D has its sexy back. When the CEOs of your organization say people strategy is number one, they're coming to you to say, okay, how do we do this? Right? So there's a huge, huge opportunity for us. Now, I know what you're saying. Put that in the context of your organization, and you probably have some barriers to executing on the development plans that you have. Just a couple here. Deloitte came out with a study that said 87% of executives put culture and engagement at the top as a key challenge. Right? Engagement right now is at an all-time low. All-time low. 14% of employees are considered engaged, according to the Gallup organization. Right? Which means that in this room, maybe like these first two rows are really engaged. They're really with us. They're taking notes. They're tweeting. They're really engaged in this presentation. Folks in the middle, well, some of you might be a little bit engaged. Some of you might be a little bit disengaged. Folks in the back, you're completely disengaged. You're not only disengaged, but you're telling everybody else how lousy the session is so that you can get other people disengaged. That's what's happening in organizations. 14%, only 14% of people are engaged. That's got to change. And I think L&D has a huge opportunity with new types of technologies on the platform side and new content types and new ways of delivering both of these to impact that. PwC, the stat here, 75 to 90% of the workforce requires continuous reskilling. This is the notion that every industry in this room is competing at hyper speed. And in order to be successful, you have to constantly reskill. And you need the technology platforms and the content and the ability to get the right content to the right people at the right time in the right context in order for that reskilling to take place. It's a key challenge. And I'll bet if I went around the room, I would hear people have issues with their delivery systems, with people being engaged, with content. That's got to change, and there's a huge opportunity for the industry to do that. And finally, and this is almost a crime, surveys say that organizations are putting people in leadership roles, and yet less than 10% have the skills they need to be effective leaders. So we're asking people to guide other people's careers without giving them the skills and the training that they need. So these challenges, and I assume I'm seeing nodding heads that these are resonating with folks in the room here. These challenges are surfacing in a lot of different ways in organizations, and I'll just touch on these briefly. One is leaders, managers, employees are overwhelmed. Josh Bersin wrote about this about 2 years ago. He first coined the term the overwhelmed employee. Anybody in this room overwhelmed? Yeah. I remember when I started Books 24/7, you know what I did in the morning? I walked in the building, and outside the building there was a newspaper, the Wall Street Journal. I picked up the Wall Street Journal, and I walked to my desk, and I spent the first 30 or 40 minutes reading the newspaper. I cannot imagine doing that today. Things are moving at such hyper speed that I've already read the newspaper practically before I'm out of the shower. I'm tweeting and reading, the tweet streams in my news feeds. we're all being asked to operate at higher levels of productivity, higher levels of efficiency, with fewer people, and it's causing not just employees to be overwhelmed, but to expect managers to be able to take the time to coach and mentor and guide and lead is becoming a bigger struggle. Secondly, again, Ajay mentioned this quite eloquently this morning, the millennial workforce, the Zen workforce, coming in to their jobs, particularly first-time, first-level employees coming out of university. They're coming into a job environment where, in the past, these employees have been the center of the universe. They've been raised in an environment where they've been brought along by their parents, by their teachers, that you're unique, you have the opportunity to do great things, and now they're being herded into a corporate environment, and they're told, well, take the same course that 600 people are taking. Their expectations, the consumerization panel we just went through, those are the expectations. I can tell you a funny story. We, at Sumtotal, we just rolled out a major new environment. It's our talent and learning platform. And it came out earlier this year, and our customers are rolling onto this platform. Well, I went to my local bank branch in August, and I live in Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia. Went into the bank branch. It was an August day, which in that area is very hot. Everybody was at the beach. And I sat down. I needed to get some checks that I had written. I needed to get printouts of those checks. So I sat down with the young man, the manager of the bank, and I asked him for some help, and he said, of course. And he started to go on his computer. And while he was on his computer, he asked me what I did for a living. And I said, well, it's kind of weird that you're asking me that question, but I work for a software company. And I realized after I said that I'm sitting at TD Bank, one of the largest Canadian banks, and it happens to be a customer of Sumtotal, so a customer of ours. And they recently upgraded to this new version of our platform. The version of the platform is all consumerized. It's built around the individual. It's got personalized recommendations and so forth. And I just happened to say to this young man, who was probably about 26 or 27, his name was Mike, I said, oh, by the way, the software company I work for powers up your learning portal, and I wonder, did you notice that it changed recently because they had just upgraded a few weeks before? And he turned to me with a big smile on his face and said, I love the new portal. I said, great, really happy to hear that. He said, do you want to see it? Sure. And he turned his computer monitor to me, and he went in and he gave me a tour of our product, which he was using as part of his daily workflow. And he went on to tell me he was just recently promoted to a first-line manager, and what he loved about it was he had all these recommendations for the compliance courses he needed to take, and then there were recommendations for additional areas based on his background that would be suitable for him. And he's describing the whole product, but he was very appreciative of this sort of consumerized approach to learning, which is, I think, has to be the direction that we move. The funny thing was he pointed to an empty desk across the way where his manager sits. And he said, my manager, she's a bit older. She's still getting used to it. It's going to take her a little bit of time. She's stuck in her ways. But here was a millennial with high expectations who was really appreciating this notion that the company was investing in consumerized technologies to help him do his job more effectively. Third, L&D can't do this alone. You all have very important roles, and especially those of you in large organizations, you're being asked to deliver life-changing, career-changing learning opportunities to people at scale. And it's hard to do that on a personalized basis when you're doing it for hundreds or thousands of people. Technology is the only way to do this. And I believe that, again, that this notion of a self-developing organization is around the principle that technology can do more of the heavy lifting. Now, before I came to India, I was doing some research on the market here, and I want to play a little bit of a game. Okay? There are three categories in this game. There's career management, manager development, and sourcing critical skills. And was trying to better understand the Indian market because all these challenges are sort of macro challenges that I see with our customers. But I want to see a show of hands here on which of these three you think India really has nailed it. You've got to figure it out. You probably, more organizations have it right than have it wrong. And which of these three areas do you still need to develop? Okay, so just by a quick show of hands, career management. How many think career management is the one area that the capability gap is the smallest, that you really haven't figured out as a community here? How many think career management is the top one in terms of okay? So 28% of organizations have it figured out in India. Career management, 28% only. Okay, manager development. Now, how many think manager development, you got that one figured out? That's the one you probably have, best. Okay, a lot of hands up on manager development. Pretty good, 38%. Still, flip side of that equation, 62% of organizations don't have it figured out, but 38% better than career management. What about sourcing critical skills? How many think that's the one that you've got figured out? That's those of you, I think half a dozen or so, raise your hand. 40% have it figured out. But each of these still, there's a big gap. Long way to go to really figuring these out. And again, I think this concept of a self-developing organization can get you there because a talent strategy will drive your business strategy. And this notion of a self-developing organization is really best defined as delivering an experience that radically changes or simplifies the ability to empower every role in your organization, or every individual in your organization, with a personalized and self-directed development journey so that you can engage employees in really meaningful growth opportunities. Right? So it's leveraging technology to make this happen. How many people are doing this today successfully? That have a way of delivering micro-learning to just the people that need it, the time they need it, and have it built in a way, like on the consumerized panel, where Amazon can tailor the goods and services you might need based on what you bought in the past. How many are doing that today with learning in their organizations? Anybody? It's a tough thing to do, and frankly, the content and the platform haven't been constructed historically in this industry in a way where that can happen. I was in China, and somebody in the audience came up. We were talking about this concept, and they said, I get it. I really get it. It's as if the makers of trains and the makers of tracks never talk to one another. And I think that's been the dilemma of the learning industry for too long. And the self-developing organization can begin to change that. Now, for this to happen, for HR function to thrive and add value, we need to be bold. We really need to aggressively think about how to get there from here. And I often wonder, if Elon Musk were in the training industry, how would Elon Musk think about this? How would Elon Musk think about reshaping the learning and development industry? Because what Elon Musk has done for cars is a little bit what we're talking about here with self-developing organization for L&D. Elon Musk didn't say, hey, I'm going to make a great new car. He said, I'm going to fundamentally reshape the car ecosystem. It's not going to run on gasoline at all. It's going to run on sun power. And I'm going to build a whole ecosystem for harvesting sun power and enabling a whole generation, a global fleet of autonomous driving vehicles that are powered by the sun. That is his vision. It's not building a great car, although a car is the mechanism. And I think as learning and development professionals, you have a right to expect that from your partners, your vendors, to help you in developing a similar type of strategy for learning and development in your organizations. We have 3 principles that we are using internally to guide our investments in this area: simplicity, engagement, empowerment. Simplicity, engagement, empowerment. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide here, but we know if you start to embrace these principles of developing a self-developing organization where you're not just pushing content at people are actually pulling it out. We were at Vodafone in Mumbai on my first day here, and this is exactly the vision that Vodafone has in India. You create an environment where there's more pull going on, where it's more natural, where people are building it into their workflow. And when you do that, people who have opportunities for development are going to stay longer. They're going to have better outcomes. They're looking for these opportunities for individualized development to build their careers. Because if you don't give them those opportunities, they will leave. We know from every survey that's been done that the average length of a millennial in an organization is about 27 months. And shrinking. So those of us who have a long career at one organization are becoming extinct because the new way of career development is starting in one company and hopping from there. So I've got a few examples of individualized development. One is American Red Cross. This is an organization that redesigned their entire learning and development organization and their approach around a 3D learning strategy. We have a case study up on our site. You can go look at it. But it's a very good example of an organization. This is the largest volunteer organization in the healthcare industry on the planet. But they fundamentally reshaped their program around the end user. Instead of pushing content, they've created a whole pool environment. Career mobility, very important. I was speaking with an organization. The CEO, this is a Fortune 50 company, said, we've done a good job as an organization to attract new candidates from the outside. What we need to do is get better at internal career mobility. We need to give the people inside better opportunities to grow and advance, because if we don't give them those opportunities, they will leave. And that's become a critical piece of their strategy. And finally, continuous learning. This is a great eye chart from Deloitte. Lots of great stats here about the overwhelmed employee and distractions at work. The bottom line is the average employee today is spending 24 minutes of discretionary time, or of time for discretionary learning today. 24 minutes. So that's what you're up against when you're trying to push programs out or you're trying to take your program to the next level. It's how do you get through that limited amount of time that people are able and willing to invest in learning. So where does that take us? I told you that I'd give you a tool today. I'd try to make this concept of a self-developing organization as a framework, make it real. And so what you have on your desk in front of you is a grid. This is something called the SkillSoft Learning and Talent Maturity Framework. It's a model that we've developed working with a number of industry experts throughout the world. And more importantly, it's a model that's been developed tapping into the wisdom and the experience of our 6,700 customers worldwide, 45 million people that are consuming learning experiences from Sumtotal platforms and SkillSoft content. The diagnostic is, I'll just explain this very quickly for you to put that chart in some context. There's 5 stages of maturity. And as you go up the curve, you achieve better states of workforce agility, adaptive HR strategy, and business performance. But the stages are very specifically defined. There's the siloed stage, this is sort of stage 1. You get to more of a targeted stage where you're getting more executive buy-in and you have specific programs targeted to specific business initiatives. Somewhere around stage 3, companies reach a tipping point where they get into a transforming stage, where learning and talent start to become part of the culture and start to merge. Companies aspire to get to continuous, but our experience is very few companies actually achieve this level. 4 or 5 is a very rare thing from the benchmarks that we've done with companies. 5 is sort of the nirvana. It's this optimized environment where you've got CEO endorsement and support for programs top down. You've got a self-developing organization where this pool is happening naturally. That people have embraced the concept of work-embedded learning, where you've got tools and delivery that is optimizing what learning I need based on what job I'm doing, where I'm at in my career, what my aspirations are. I may be an accountant today, but I want to be a project manager tomorrow. How do I get there today? Too many organizations have just vertical ladders, and if you don't follow that path, you're kind of forced in many cases to change companies. So we have to rethink all of these things, and this is a tool that you can begin to use to look at your own organization. There are 9 essential indicators on the left side of this chart here So you can see organizational culture, HR role and strategy, and for each of those, there's a short description of what it means to be a level 1, or level 2, or level 3, et cetera.